Hey, my name is Matt Storr, and I repair saxophones for a living. Today, I would like to show you a 1925 Conn New Wonder Series 2 Alto saxophone. Its original finish of burnished gold plate. Now, this saxophone, the New Wonder Series 2, is sometimes referred to as the Chewberry, but I do not do that because I like to be correct about things. And Leon Chewberry did play a Conn, but he played a New Wonder Series 1, and he did not play an Alto. So this is not really very correct at all, ever, to call this a Chewberry, although you'll hear that quite a bit. So this is a Conn New Wonder Series 2 Alto saxophone. This is made in Elkhart, Indiana in 1925. And as I said, this is the burnished gold plate finish. You can see here the beautiful engraving on this instrument. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. Not too much of a glare. Beautiful kind of cabin by a lake scene. See if I can get it to show up a little better. And that sort of special engraving would have been found on the burnished gold plate model only. Sometimes these were called the portrait model, and sometimes inside the circle they had a portrait of a woman in them, but you could also find scenes such as this, sometimes pastoral nature scenes like this, and sometimes scenes based on Greek myth. Really depended on what someone had asked for and what the mood of the engravers was on that day. Now, this is called a burnished gold finish. As you'll notice, the finish on this is almost entirely intact, which is pretty amazing for a saxophone that is pushing 90 years old. The difference between a burnished finish and a normal gold-plated finish is that the way that this gold has been put on here, it is extremely thick, much thicker than normal plating. And once the gold was adhered to the underlying silver, which you can see here, hopefully, because gold doesn't adhere straight to brass too well, so they would put a very quick copper flash, a tiny bit of copper plate, and then a heavy silver plate over that, and then a really heavy gold plate over that. And to get this nice smooth finish, they would take a highly polished piece of steel called a burnisher, and they would rub the gold flat. And then they would polish their burnisher and then do it again. And they would do the entire instrument hand burnished like that. And you would get this really spectacular, really well adhered gold that was very thick and just had a really beautiful shine to it because it was hand applied. Because if you think about gold as a precious metal, if you want to put a heavy plating of gold onto something, it's going to be fuzzy, right? It's going to, like if you look at the surface of it, the microscope, it's going to look like this. And if you want to get it to be nice and flat and shiny, you've got two ways that you can make it flat and shiny. One, you can buff it. That is basically like how you would sand wood down to make it nice and flat. So you take everything down to the lowest, like kind of, gully in the finish, which obviously would be extremely wasteful when you're talking about gold. Or you can push it flat with a burnisher. And that's what they did. And that is a very, very old method of finishing gold, and is extremely labor intensive, so you don't really see it anymore. So these old burnished gold plate instruments like this, 90 years old, and it still has almost full coverage, even though you can see, I mean, this horn's been played. You can see the scratches here from being used on a stand. This instrument was used, but the gold is still covering almost all of it. I mean, even the touch pieces are barely worn because the gold is so thick. Also because this is in extremely good shape, but I doubt modern plating would have held up this well over this much time. So that is the plating and the finish on this instrument, which is one of the things that makes it special. Another thing that makes it special is that it's in such good shape, which is why I wanted to share this one with you. So I've got a Conn New Wonder Series 1 that I've done in tenor. I've done New Wonder Series 2/6M transitionals in alto, and now I have a New Wonder Series 2. And after this, I'll see if I can do a regular old 6M. So we've got the full kind of line from the 20s through the 30s of Conn. So the things about this instrument, as far as from the playing perspective, the sound on them is really huge, really nice and fat and rich. It's a really great saxophone sound. It's very uniquely Conn. It's a much bigger sound than the later 6Ms. The transitionals are kind of a halfway point. Some of them have a really big sound, but as the bore gets more like the 6M, the intonation improves, but possibly at the expense of some of the richness of sound. The 6Ms are certainly more focused. This has a bit more spread character. And it's just a really big, ballsy, full sound. And this instrument, in particular, this horn, after I finished overhauling it with domed metal resonators, it really vibrates under the fingers. And one of the problems I had was keeping the low C sharp from blowing open. And that's because the C sharp is on a rod all by itself, and it's got a spring right here. And it feels pretty good under the finger because it's not attached to the G sharp. If it was, like on some of these older instruments with similar mechanics, because the C sharp fulcrum is not the fulcrum is so close to the touch piece, actuating those two together requires a lot of force. But this does not have an articulated C sharp, so the C sharp is by itself. It doesn't activate the G sharp. But sometimes, particularly when you've got a good pad seal, the pressure of the wave can open keys a little bit, and I had a little bit of trouble finding the correct pressure so that this C sharp felt good, but also did not blow open when I was playing low notes. So the sound on these is huge. The intonation is not terrible. I mean, it's, you know, if you're coming from like a modern Yamaha or something and you expect the horn to do all the work for you, that is not going to happen. You definitely have to listen. You definitely have to voice it in your throat. But it's not so bad. If you run across one of these that has really bad intonation, chances are it's not set up well. As you'll see, these horns tend to like pretty wide open key heights. The altos and tenors, in my experience. And when you do that, kind of everything starts to fall in line. Like I said, intonation isn't perfect, but it's not bad at all. Altissimo is very easy. As long as you've got your voicing down, these things really respond well to, you know, playing with good throat control and lots of support. Ergonomically, they're pretty good. They're not great. I mean, they're not, you know, modern, but they're not that bad. The stacks are in line, as you can see here, instead of turned a little bit like on later horns. The pearls, the way that the horn is set up, the pearls are not super even top to bottom, but it's really not that bad. The octave mechanism is of an old style. Make sure you get that right. As you can see here, it's kind of a two-parter. And you want to make sure that when you've got the octave mechanism depressed and you press your G, that the little arm here remains in contact with both parts of the octave mechanism throughout the travel. That's basically what's going to make your octave mechanism feel good. And you can have a little bit of empty space when you let go. See, I let go here, and then it starts closing that octave key there. That's fine because you're not going to feel that. So if you have to have empty space anywhere, you want to have it between this arm and the body octave pad, because you're not going to feel that because you're letting go of the key versus pressing on it. But this G, if you want the octave mechanism to feel good, you have to have the G be in contact the entire time. So see, when I press the octave mechanism, this arm comes down and rests just barely right on top of the G arm here. And when I depress the G, flips this up, closes the neck octave, opens the body octave. And that's the switch between the A and the G. The obviously the later altos, the later Conn altos, really turn into modern mechanism. This is the last of Conn's old style mechanism. It's very similar to the new Wonder Series 1, although I find it to be better built. The new Wonder Series 1s that I've worked on can kind of be all over the place. But when you find a new Wonder Series 2 in good shape, they seem to kind of really be getting more precise with their key fit. One thing you'll run into with these, and this is common with a lot of older horns, is you've got these really long rods. So here's your upper stack, right? It's all on one rod. Your Bis and your G are not separate. It's all one really long rod that all goes down this way. And same thing on the back here. You've got your G sharp down to your D on one really long rod here, and you've got your B flat and B also on a really long rod here. And the B key goes from here to here. So you've got this huge long hinge tube. If you've got damage here, or if the body has been bent, that can be kind of a pain to get fit right, to have it move freely but also be tight around the rod. Same thing here. Starting off by getting this rod super straight and then getting your posts lined up is going to be essential to having that feel like it's supposed to feel. And you will probably find, unless the horn is in extremely good shape to start with or has been overhauled recently by someone who knows what they're doing, that these are not going to be in line. And probably they've been working because the keys are very loose. So once you get your rod straight and once you get your posts aligned and you put everything back together, you're probably going to find that you've got lots of play in the mechanism. And especially on the bar key, on your C sharp key in the upper stack, there's barely any key barrel around the hinge tube. If this is loose, it's not loose on this one, if this is loose, you're going to have a really hard time getting things to feel right in the upper stack. See how you can hear nice positive feel, whether I start from C and add B, or whether I add B and then add C, or go from B to A or C to A. If this key is loose, then it's going to kind of be rocking in a different way depending on which key you actuate first, and it's going to feel really spongy. So that's one thing to watch out for. So your key fit on these, usually, unless you find one in really good shape, which is rarer and rarer these days because they're pushing 90 years old, you're going to have to do some key fitting work. So just expect that from the outset. It's going to be a more expensive overhaul than a Yamaha from the 80s. Another interesting thing about these, and a lot of Conns have this, including the new Wonder Series 2, the inner part of the neck tenon is conical. So you've got a wider diameter here than you do right here. So the inside of this tenon is a cone. And you have to watch out for that when you're fitting the neck, right? If your neck doesn't come airtight and tight, then you have to expand this, assuming that the problem is that this has been misshapen or worn. And you have to be very careful about the way you do it, because certain tools, the way they work is they squeeze, like kind of a can opener type action. And with the neck tenon being thicker here than here, because it's a cone, it's really easy to mess that up and either remove the conicity, mess the conicity up, or more likely just way overexpand the top relative to the bottom. So be careful when you're fitting that. And you'll find a lot that you have to fit the neck tenon because the Tenon Receiver that they made on these horns is just not very robust. You can see that the cut goes down most of the way. A lot of times you're going to find right here and this one doesn't have it, but a lot of times you'll find on the neck tenon there's going to be like a Y-shaped crack that comes down from either side at a 45-degree angle from the bottom of this cut here. And when you've got that, you can try and silver solder it, but most likely you're just going to have to fabricate a new tenon. So keep an eye out for that crack there. Once that happens, when you tighten this down, the bottom bulges out and you'll never get a really good seal. So keep an eye out for that crack there. And these aren't too hard to make. I mean, it's just a tube, but it's not free. So keep an eye out for that. Also on this instrument, you're going to find you've got straight pivot screws, right? So let's see if I've got any I can actually show you. look like I have any to show you. Well, I can show you a later Conn pivot screw. So here is a Conn 6M pivot screw. And the pivot screw on this instrument is very similar, where you've got the threaded portion, smooth portion, where the locking screw goes, threaded portion, and then is where it's different, is this is a tapered screw, whereas the screw in this instrument is straight. So it's just, oh wait, actually I've got one here. I thought I had one. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So it's just a, come on, focus. It's just a straight screw, which doesn't give you a whole lot of fit side to side. So you've got to have your or end to end. So you've got to have your posts lined up correctly if you want your pivot keys to be fit very well on these instruments. Unlike the 6M, where you can just screw the pivot screw in a little bit farther and have it mate because it's tapered so it can be fit. These do have the locking screws on the posts, which is always something to watch out for. If they're damaged or missing, you do need to have locking screws in here. The pivot screws will back out eventually if you don't. You can get replacements, you can make replacements. If they've been stripped out, you can use a 256 machine screw and cut it off and slot it and tap this back out, and it looks almost the same and it works really well. This also has rolled tone holes, as all Conns do up until shortly after the war. And these tone holes are probably not going to be level. I've really never seen them perfectly level. On some 6Ms, they get really close, but on these earlier Conns, they're hardly ever level. And some people will kind of, basically dent the tone hole into levelness, but unless your unlevelness is the result of body damage and you're fixing that damage to get the tone hole back to level, basically you're damaging the body. So you're fixing the tone hole at the expense of the body, which is not something I do. You can float the pads and make them work. They may last 20, let's even be pessimistic and say 30% less time than the pad would last on a perfectly level tone hole. But that's a small price to pay, where you've got maybe one extra repad over a 25-year period versus denting the body of your saxophone and altering the bore of the instrument. So beware of leveling these unlevel tone holes, because there's really no way you can do it. As long as the body is correct, they just weren't very good at making them super level from the factory, so you'll run into that. The rollers on this instrument are actual pearl, which is pretty cool. The only uncool thing about that is they're very hard to find these days, so a lot of times if these instruments haven't been played, these rods will rust and expand and crack these pearls, and you're going to have to replace them with something else. Or if you can find a junker, which is actually what I had to do for this one, to replace the pearls with, then you're going to be changing them. But the originals should be actual pearl, and not to be confused with the pearl looking stuff on the later ones. These are actually real mother of pearl rollers. So you've got a microtuner on the neck, and this one works slightly different than the later 6M version. I'll unscrew it here. Now the purpose of this is so you put your mouthpiece on, and then instead of taking your mouthpiece on and off the cork, you just turn this, and you can see as I turn it, watch the distance between here and here, the neck actually gets longer. And there's pluses and minuses to this approach, but it's died out, and for probably good reason. I mean, it's a pretty complicated mechanism. A lot can go wrong with it, and the benefits do not seem to outweigh the potential drawbacks. Although when they're in good working shape, it is a nice thing to have, because you can change the length of the neck without changing the internal dimensions of the mouthpiece by pulling it on and off and increasing the volume as well. So you can see how this works. You've got an inner sleeve, goes in. These two tongues keep it aligned, and then you've got the external barrel, which spins freely. And that's how that works. Now you've got to make sure that this fits well, and every time I overhaul one of these, I also overhaul the Microtuner. Comes apart into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. Clean everything, refit it, make sure that it is absolutely airtight, because if you've got a leak here, then the rest of the instrument, which is all of the instrument, is not going to play as well as it could. You're going to lose power, it's going to feel fuzzy, stuffy, and if the leak is bad enough, you may even overblow octaves more often than you want to. And of course, you can check for neck seal by plugging it on one side and doing suction on the other end. And it should hold suction indefinitely. If you've got a slow leak, that's still a leak. And you can fit this in a couple different ways. You can expand the interior part, or you can plate it and then lap it in. It's rare that it's worn so bad you have to plate it and lap it in, but I have done that before. So, that is the Conn New Wonder Series 2. This is a particularly beautiful burnished gold example with some rather special engraving that would have been done by one of the Stenberg brothers, which were Conn's master engravers at the time. And the Conn New Wonder Series 2, particularly in Alto, is a very affordable instrument. You can typically find them depending on finish and condition. This is obviously one of the more expensive ones because this is a particularly fine example in a rare finish that is heavily gold plated and with barely any wear, that has just been overhauled by me. But you can usually find these unoverhauled anywhere between $800 and $1,500. Overhauled anywhere between $1,200 and I'd say, I mean, I'm not sure what this one goes for, but because there's just not too many of them. But usually anywhere between $1,200 and say $2,500, which for a vintage saxophone that's just been overhauled is really not too bad, especially for one that plays really well. Just be prepared to get used to the ergonomics, which are a little bit different, a little bit antiquated compared to modern horns, although they're not very bad. And make sure the overhaul on it is good, because a horn this old, a horn that's slightly unusual compared to modern saxophones, unfortunately they're not always overhauled super well. But that's my specialty. It's probably why I stay so busy. And also, this saxophone, I forgot to mention, this is, or was, owned by getasax.com. Sounds just like it's, or spelled just like it sounds, getasax.com. Which is a dealer who I happen to live close to and I'm friends with, and he's got a lot of particularly fine vintage saxophones and mouthpieces, and I do a lot of work for him. And I've been approached in the past by different dealers who wanted me to do work for them, but I've always said no because they always wanted to do the minimum amount of work so they could just do a lot of turnover and a lot of profit, and that's not really, although I've got nothing wrong with profit, it's not really my style to do the minimum needed. I like to do what makes the horn right. And fortunately, that is what Brian at getasax.com likes to do as well. So I get to see a lot of cool horns, and he gets a lot of good overhauls. So check out getasax.com. He's got, like I said, lots of really nice saxophones and mouthpieces. So that is a 1925 Conn New Wonder Series 2 Alto saxophone. Formerly owned by getasax.com. He just sold this one with a fresh overhaul on it. I think the new owner is going to be very pleased because this plays great. Huge sound, pretty well in tune. Just the whole thing vibrates into the fingers when you're playing it. Altissimo is easy. The overtones are full, complex, rich. It's a really nice saxophone to play if you can, get used to the slightly vintage ergonomics and intonation. So, my name is Matt Storr. I repair saxophones for a living. I hope you found this helpful, informative, useful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, contact me, check me out at my website, give me a call, however you'd like to get in touch. I love to talk saxophone. Thanks for watching.